hello everybody. Welcome to the Public Theater, and thanks for coming for this chat before you see the show tonight. My name's Jack. I am on the artistic staff here. I work in the New Work Development Office, and for some reason, I am moderating this talk about Shakespeare. Although, as Stephen pointed out to me in the lobby, these plays were once new plays, so I am in some way, I guess, supposedly qualified for this. But I'm very excited to have the two people seated to my right, and I'm going to just briefly have your bios in front of me so I don't leave anything out. To my immediate right is Stephen Brown-Fried. I'm saying Fried, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. Is a fantastic director who has directed at basically every Shakespeare theater you can think of. Trinity Shakespeare, Shakespeare Theater of New Jersey, Milwaukee Shakespeare, Illinois Shakespeare. Put state name and Shakespeare, and Stephen is directed there. And is also the executive dean at the New Schools College of the Performing Arts, and is the director of NATCO's Henry VI. So is the director behind the show that you are going to see tonight. And then to my further right is James Shapiro, who is perhaps needs no introduction for you Shakespeare heads out there, but has written an ungodly amount of best-selling books about the Bard. A Year in the Life of William Shakespeare, Contested Will, 1606, Year of Lear, my personal favorite, which is Shakespeare in a Divided America. And since 1985 has been a professor up at Columbia University, although as I just learned, soon to be former faculty at Columbia University. So congrats on wrapping up.
Shifting my attention to theater.
Yes, and basically, any production of Shakespeare is also, I should have stated first, is one of our Shakespeare scholars in residence here at the Public, which for those of you who don't know, is still to this day legally known as the New York Shakespeare Festival. So, when people always get confused when they get a check from us, they're like, wait, I don't understand, I got this check from something called the New York Shakespeare Festival. It's like, yeah, that's because that's technically, the Public is our nickname. So I'm delighted to talk to you both. I sort of previewed both of you about some of the questions I wanted to ask. So I'll get us started, and then we'll open it up to you folks if you have any questions for our illustrious panel here. But the sort of, I suppose the softball opening question is, and I'd love to start with you, Jim, is, so Henry VI, parts 1, 2, and 3. I love the tagline that NATCO has been using of this is a trilogy in 2 parts, right? So it's 3 plays that you're experiencing in 2 evenings or 2 sittings of theater, or a marathon, as the case may be. And so, Jim, from a scholarly perspective, where do these plays sit in the oeuvre, to use a pretentious word, of Shakespeare's life and work?
There are 2 answers to that question.
I love that.
The one I believe in and the one that scholars are hashing out right now.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
This is what we know. We know that sometime between 1590 and 1592, Shakespeare and others wrote a 2-part play that we have come to call the second and third part of Henry VI. In its own day, went under different names. The True Tragedy, The Contention, doesn't really make a difference. Mm-hmm. It's a 2-part sequence. And it was the first time he wrote history. And we could talk about why he would write a history play and what it means to write a history play that looks back in time a century or so earlier. In your mind, you might think of what it's like to write Hamilton, to go back to an earlier moment in American history, right, to illuminate the contemporary moment. At any rate, these 2 plays were written, and as with Star Wars or other great multi-part works of art, the prequel was then written. And sometime later, the sequel, Richard III, was written. So you have the 3 Henry VI plays and Richard III. Right. The part that is contested that I'm much less interested in talking about, there's a book out in October called Shakespeare at 30 that's going to explore this, argues that Shakespeare didn't write Henry VI Part 1, but the likelihood is when his company acquired all 3 texts, he revised them all. So these are knotty questions, completely uninteresting to me because all I really care about are the plays in production.
Yeah, I think maybe then one other question that I'll ask you in this is, that notion of a contemporary artist, whenever the contemporary needle hits the timeline of our history, talking about a previous time. What is it about this story that feels like, if Shakespeare's writing histories, this is the history that feels important?
Sure.
Yeah.
The best answer I have to that is to go back to our second president, John Adams.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a letter to the 6th president of the United States, his son, John Quincy Adams, saying, I'm reading Shakespeare's histories. Because Shakespeare's histories, especially this first set of history plays, tell us all about the dangers of factionalism, rivalry, corruption.
Right.
I know these are things that are far from contemporary issues.
Exactly.
I'm joking, but Adams understood because he was one of the people who helped create the Constitution and helped found this country. He understood how vulnerable this country was to division. And his way of grappling with that was to turn to the plays that you have now mounted here.
Beautifully said, yeah. And so, Stephen, to you, so now you've been with this production for quite some time. We're very, very honored, first of all, and thrilled. Everyone who saw the original NetCo production of this that you directed at this theater raved about it for years and years. And I was the one staff member who never got to see it. I felt like I was left out of the coolest party. And so now I'm like, I finally got my wish. I get to see it here. I don't even have to go up the street. It's right here in my office. So for you, what is it about these plays that speaks to right now? What does it feel like to be sitting with these words, building this production in 2026 in America?
It's interesting, I'll just first say, I think there's a part of what the plays originally must have meant for their audience that we can't reproduce because we're not English. We're not in the middle of England exploring history that is our own. And I think there was an aspect of the experience for the original audience that was one of kind of contemplation of your own national identity. And that we can't replicate here. But so for us, I actually think the experience, I think part of what keeps me working on Shakespeare is I find profound comfort in the reminder that and by which I mean us, that we're not the first to go through something.
Right.
And I think for us watching these plays now, it's striking how similar a lot of the circumstances, and actually have become even more similar since 2018.
Sure.
So, a couple of examples there. The most obvious one, the one that really screams out, is in Part 2, the Jack Cade Rebellion, which is, Cade is a Kentishman who basically comes in and foments a popular uprising. He was an actual historical figure in 1450. Correct me if I get anything wrong. The public, they were upset about a lot of things. They were upset about taxation, about the corruption of Henry's monarchy, and also about the loss of French territories. And Cade came in. He claimed to be Mortimer. The Mortimer line was the chief rival to Henry's monarchy, and basically, and they killed government officials. They did some real damage to England. He was eventually the revolution was put down. I won't go so far as to say, the parallels to our world today.
We can all.
Well, and the thing that was interesting was that in 2018, we hadn't lived through certain things, and there's a lot of comedy in those Cade scenes. Right. And I remember in 2018 thinking of these scenes as these sort of, very, very funny scenes about something crazy that could potentially happen in a distant country. And returning to it this time around.
After January 6th.
There you go, thank you. we started, in auditions, we started to find it harder to treat those scenes as comedy. And there still is a lot of comedy in them. Don't worry, we haven't, kicked it out of the room. But we kind of were more comfortable with the scenes taking a more serious bent because we had a lived experience of that dynamic.
Right.
Similarly, I think that what's in the first half, a lot of the first half, particularly the first act of the first half, is this struggle between England and France, and particularly the Dauphin, led with Joan of Arc, their effort to free themselves from English, rule. Yeah. And when I returned to the script now, having lived through I think in the last 3 or 4 years, anti-colonialism has been, so many conversations we've been having have been around anti-colonialist efforts that it was hard not to read the French scenes through that lens and not to see Joan as a kind of agent of decolonization.
Yeah.
And so coming back to the play, so I guess your question was, what is this for the audiences? I hope audiences in seeing this, I think the relationship is more like what the relationship was for the ancient Greeks watching Greek tragedy, which is seeing circumstances that would resonate with things that they themselves were living through, but in a different place, so that they had the safety to explore those circumstances at a remove.
Yeah.
But I can easily imagine in a dystopian fantasy, you bringing this production back in another 6 years after America has been riven by civil war, because these are the great Civil War plays.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what happens when a society becomes so divided that it takes up arms against itself.
Yeah.
And I don't know how close or not we're going to be to that in 2028, but leave an opening in the public theater schedule in case we need to bring this.
I'll get Oscar right on that. Back. Yeah, it is like we live in portentous times, and these plays feel exceedingly relevant right now. The other question I wanted to ask of both of you is sort of around the framing of this production. So this is in 2 evenings, or for the hardcore out there, and I'm one of them, marathon day of seeing both parts of these Henry VIs, is just this idea of durational theater. I confess I am a durational theater junkie. I don't know if anyone saw Gats here at the Public at any point over the last 15 years. Okay, you and me. There's something about sitting in a theater for a very, very long period of time and knowing that that's what you're doing, and you get your comfy pants on and you're ready to go. I personally think that's one of the things that makes theater unique. And I'm curious for, knowing that about these 3 plays being written at different times and then added together, historically, what is the audience's experience in the 1590s sitting down and watching a multi-part story? And then I want to ask Stephen about what it feels like to do that today. But I'm actually curious about the historical...
the first thing I should say is they're not sitting down, or most of them are not sitting down.
Yeah.
They're standing for the duration of the show.
So we're soft, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
The early public amphitheaters, this would have been staged at the theater, that was the name of the theater, in the northern suburbs, and it could hold 2,000 or so. So think of it as a kind of Delacorte experience without seats, or seats only for the donors, is another way of putting it. Shakespeare's plays were always cut in performance. They just were. And one of the reasons we know that is Hamlet uncut is 4 hours long. And if you are staging it in a day in November or March of 1601, that final scene in which Richard Burbage's Hamlet is fencing with the actor playing Laertes, they would have been doing it in the dark. You can't do it that way.
Right.
Plays, Shakespeare spoke of our 2 hours traffic at the stage. Most of these plays, even at fast speed, no intermission, take 2.5 hours or so.
Yeah.
So just assume that Shakespeare wrote long. They had to hand in the play to the Master of Revels to make sure it was politically acceptable.
Right.
You couldn't add stuff, but you could always cut stuff. Yeah. And for the last 400 years, directors have been trimming the plays, and especially multi-part plays like the first and second set of history plays. So that's just the way it's always been.
Got it. And did you have a sense of when the idea of like allowing for longer cuts of these plays, or I know that in my own Shakespeare going experience, like I've seen the Henry IVs back to back, for example. Some people even try to do the whole Henriette. Like, is there a moment when that people start to really experiment with?
I would say whatever experimentation there was ended in 2005 with the proliferation of the iPhone. Because my first question when I work with directors now is, how many minutes do you want me to cut it to?
Right.
Because everybody knows at the 2 hour and 30-minute mark, the phones are out. People cannot exist in our culture without checking for messages at that mark. So I think your experience is a dwindling experience.
I know, but I'm going to keep the dream alive. And then last question before we open it up is so then for a contemporary rendering of this, how are you thinking about this sort of, how long is the experience altogether?
It keeps on getting referred to as 6 hours, but it's actually 5.5.
Yeah.
Part two is actually about 2.5.
Correct your friends.
Part one is a solid 3. But I think for me, the thing that I was saying to Jack before this, I feel like it's great to see one night or the other during the week, but there's something about the marathon experience that I think is the truest experience of what the artistic
experience.
It was what the impulse was in putting it together, because there's a meta-theatrical experience that happens when you go through that whole journey with the actors, because I'm not exaggerating when it is a deeply grueling physical experience for the actors to do this. I mean, actors who have been acting professionally for decades have said to me, without question, this is the most challenging thing I've ever done in my career. And the cast refers to it as like the theater triathlon. And so when you actually do that, at the end of the 5.5 hours, there's this sense of having been through something with that cast that actually I think mirrors like what the country whose story they're telling has been through. So you get this kind of multi-layer thing at the end. The first time we did the marathon, you felt when it ended, there was this kind of collective like, holy cow, what were we just all through? Which is actually kind of what's happening inside the play too. Like, holy cow, what were we just through? And so there's that I find very exciting.
I love that. Wow, yeah, that's beautiful. We only have a few minutes, but if anyone has any questions for our esteemed guest, I'd want to try to leave some time for that. Yeah, it's right here.
I think it's often asked. So we can't experience what it was like to experience the play in Shakespeare's time. And you're trying to make it relevant and resonant with us now, the audience. How do you walk the line between doing those two things and not over-conceptualizing as you try to make it relevant? Like, how do you do that? I'm sure it's very common to ask.
For me, I try to keep the production open enough that the audience can hear the play. For me, the biggest goal is to just enable the audience to truly hear that play, because I think I don't want the play to only mean one thing. I want the play to bring an audience member in and to allow an audience member to think, oh my God, that reminds me of this. Or, oh my God, and I can't control that.
Right.
But, so for me, I tend to avoid approaches to Shakespeare that kind of say, like, this is this today, and this is this today. And there is a very valid version of this play that makes the whole Jack Cade sequence look exactly like January 6th and puts that iconography on stage and dresses people to look that way. I've seen the productions that did that. We could have. And for me, it was important that the world live in a kind of heightened but abstract world onto which we can map the things that connect with each of us, which are going to be different as the different people in an audience. I don't know if that makes sense.
And I just add to that, directors have a vision of the connection between the moment and these 400-year-old plays. Some directors are so wedded to the concept that gaps begin to show between the language of the play and that concept. You can't really force a concept on a play. You can hope that your vision of the play in a particular moment will bring out things in a 400-year-old play that speak to that moment. And because theaters line up shows a year in advance, it's very hard to know exactly what that intersection of this old play and the moment is. If this were a story about, say, a naval blockade off of, the English Channel, it might speak in a way to the conflict right now in the Middle East in a way that it wouldn't. You can't force it, in other words. And successful productions are those that allow the moment and the play to find each other, as strange as that sounds. And as difficult and as risky as that is. And there are certain plays that speak to the moment, and there are certain plays that do so, but less powerfully. And if you're lucky, you're a member of a company that finds a play that somehow aligns with the cultural concerns of that moment. You can't anticipate it.
To what you're saying, something on this I think is an actor a wise actor once explained to me that the word entertainment comes from the root of entre, but like between, and because entertainment is something that happens in between what's on stage and what's in the audience. So it's not, the entertainment is not actually the show itself, but it's the thing that happens between an audience member and whatever it is they're seeing, that thing in the middle. And something I've felt very much on this production is that the experience of the play is as contingent on what each individual audience member brings into the theater on a nightly basis as it is on what's happening on stage. And something's going to happen in that meeting, and it's going to be unique for every audience member.
Yeah, so sad.
Next question.
Yes, other questions. Yeah, sure, right here.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. The question is for Professor Shapiro, and the comment would be for Director Fried. Was this his first play that was put on stage? It was in 1592. And from a little bit of sight reading that I've done, it seemed like at that time it was a big success. And it drew the attention of someone like Robert Greene, who started criticizing Shakespeare as the upstart crow, and lines from this play. So 1592 was the first known play that was staged in whatever, the theater or the Rose or where?
It's a very good question. And the answer is nobody knows for sure. The current state of Shakespeare scholarship is trying to push back earlier and earlier Shakespeare's involvement as a working playwright to 1588 or so, and sees him collaborating with other playwrights, with Marlowe, with Peele, with Nash, with the other main playwrights at that time, perhaps on these plays as well. Robert Greene is another writer and talks about the only Shakes scene in the country and criticizes him in 1592. But I've spent my entire adult life wrestling with these questions. I can't tell you when he started or which was his first or second or third or fourth play or with whom he collaborated. All that is highly speculative. All that we do know is he was responsible for 2 and 3, Henry VI, and undoubtedly revised all 3 of those, and then went on to write Richard III as a kind of, one Henry VI is the prequel, Richard III is the sequel. And you get to make the comment.
Yes.
too, Stephen.
Yeah, it's a feedback. I mean, I loved the show. I saw the first part. Pretty much loved everything. When it comes to relevance, often this thing comes up, that present day relevance of a 400-year-old play. I'm a lay person. I'm not a drama expert or literature expert, but love plays. It seems that Shakespeare's language itself is so timeless that one doesn't need to change the context of the original situation, because most Shakespeare lovers or people who come to see Shakespeare play would see the connection. Like Greek tragedies, even if you focus on the language, it becomes relevant even today and will be relevant tomorrow and 10 years later or 100 years later. So I get skeptical when I see plays not in the period costume, but in this situation, I loved it. You did it very intelligently. The costume is not period costume, because I guess that takes a lot of money and resources to produce. So it seemed very, and the things that you've done with the black and white for the English and all white for the French to distinguish, it was not distracting. And one other line I want to add in this context. Some years ago, I went to see a play, a Shakespeare play, Julius Caesar, in one of the college auditoriums. And, but this was done by an outside company. They were just using the hall, the auditorium. So Julius Caesar was performed in modern day clothing, 3-piece suit, with some actors coming with a briefcase into the stage. It was so distracting and so jarring. I mean, one doesn't probably have to spend a whole lot of money to bring in period costume, as long as it is done, tastefully. That was so. Even Globe in London is guilty of this. About 5 years ago, I went to see Macbeth, and they were in modern day clothing, and I thought it was a waste of my money and the effort.
I get to go first.
Oh,
Tim's gonna go.
I wonder if you're going to say what I was going to say.
Here's the problem with your experience, which is genuine, and I'm not discounting it. When Shakespeare and his contemporaries performed in the 1590s, with very few exceptions, every show was modern dress, because doublet and hose was modern dress. So what's happened since is a kind of anachronistic desire to dress people in historical ways. But clothing for a production in Shakespeare's day cost more than buying a play itself. If you were going to play the aristocrats or the rulers in your play, you would get them secondhand from very wealthy people who didn't want to wear their Met Gala equivalent outfits twice. So Shakespeare's theater was modern dress, and they weren't distracted, but 400 years of tradition has now made it distracting if we continue that original tradition of modern dress.
That was, yeah, you beat me to it. But I think the other piece of it, and I agree with your basic premise that the language is completely comprehensible today. Like, if done well.
If the actors know what they're saying.
Yeah, if the actors know what they're saying, it's completely straightforward.
Which is not always the case.
No.
True. The thing that I think is the other interesting piece of this is, the British people, the English in Shakespeare's time didn't go around just naturally speaking iambic pentameter, and like that, the language of Shakespeare's plays is a heightened linguistic form.
Absolutely.
And so there is a kind of imagined reality that Shakespeare's crafting linguistically, sonically, theatrically on stage. So I kind of, you know, and look, I've done productions of Shakespeare, totally. I've done the like suit productions of Shakespeare. You know, I'm not a purist in any sense. But I think ultimately you have to kind of craft an imagined abstraction on stage to align with what the language is doing.
Well said.
And I will add, we're almost out of time, so we'll take one last question.
Yeah, please.
From a production point of view, could this, or how could this have been done at the Delacorte? Because that's when I was watching this.
Well, I don't think it could have, because it's interesting. I mean, you could, look, you can put any play on, I think any play can be made to work on any stage.
Right.
To me, the experience of the Delacorte is such a key component of any theatrical experience in that space, and I'm not sure that experience is completely aligned with the experience of Henry VI, the trilogy in 2 parts. So I mean.
And I'll just give a little quote of that, but don't quote me out of this room. I'm involved in rehearsals of Delacorte shows and have been for the last 15 years. And the intimacy of working in a small space like this in rehearsal is extraordinary. Going to the Delacorte is basically like playing it in the outfield at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
All the energy just disappears, and only the most talented directors know how to get that energy back in so large and open a space. So the Delacorte defeats productions, even though for me it's the most glorious way to see the plays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're out of time.
We
but
are.
Thank you both.
Thank you both, and thank you all for coming a little early, and enjoy the show tonight. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.